It's clearly a signal to tell analysts throughout the intelligence community, you tell the truth, you provide objective analysis as you're supposed to be doing, you are running the risk of getting fired.
That was former CIA Director John Brennan on my colleague Nicole Wallace's show just last week. Now, the blockbuster story he was reacting to at the time was the news that Trump Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard had fired intelligence officials for putting out an intelligence report that contradicted Trump. As former CIA Director Brennan put it last week, they were fired for telling the truth. Back in March, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelan immigrants without due process, of course. And his justification at the time, as I'm sure you remember, for invoking the act was his claim that America was being, quote unquote, invaded by Venezuela. Invaded specifically by members of the Tren de Aragua gang at the direction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. It turns out, though, that, as you all know, that is not true. That's false. The intelligence report these analysts were fired over stated that the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua was not controlled by or in cahoots with Venezuela's president. U.S. intelligence agents reported the actual truth, the truth that contradicted Trump, and were fired for it. That in its own was, of course, a jaw-dropping revelation. And that is where the story stood last week when former CIA Director John Brennan commented on it. But now the story has gotten even darker. This week, the New York Times reported that even before Trump Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard fired the agents who published a truthful report, her chief of staff had ordered intelligence analysts to rewrite that truthful report so it could not be, quote, used against Trump. So not only is the Trump administration firing intelligence agencies for telling the truth, they are also pressuring them to be, at least the very least, less than truthful. Joining me now is former CIA Director John Brennan. It's great to see you, and I know you've been following this closely, and as somebody who grew up and had rose to the top of the intelligence community, I can only imagine how outraged you feel as you see all of the developments. But I just have to ask you about this latest one. I mean, what do you make of this reporting that the chief of staff for the Director of National Intelligence was pressuring intelligence analysts who are not political at all, they're just doing their job, they're providing the analysis, pressuring them to rewrite their findings to be more in line with what Trump wanted?
Well, Jen, it's worrisome on so many levels. First of all, the integrity and objectivity of the intelligence community's analysis is a solemn obligation of all analysts to make sure that there's going to be no politicization of that analysis and that intelligence. And it's quite clear from the reporting that has come out that the direction that was coming from Tulsi Gabbard's chief of staff, Joe Kent, tried to manipulate the analysis so that it would, in fact, conform with what the Trump administration has done on Venezuela. And it's because these analysts resisted that interference is the reason why they were fired. But also, this individual, Joe Kent, has been nominated to be the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. I was the first director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And it's critically important that the leader of that center really makes sure that all analysis that comes out of it is going to adhere to those requirements of objectivity and integrity. And this individual clearly is a partisan individual who wanted to, reshape the analysis again so that it wouldn't be used to undercut either Gabbard or Donald Trump. And again, it's just so contrary to everything that intelligence analysts throughout their careers, throughout their training, have been taught.
At any level, puts them all in an incredibly untenable position. I wanted to ask you, too, about some news that just broke a few hours ago. And we've seen reporting about this for the last couple of weeks. NBC News is reporting that at least half of the National Security Council has been fired or put on leave. And a lot of the explanation you hear from people is, well, Trump doesn't rely on a policy team, so he doesn't need a policy process. And I always say, but that's the whole process of having cabinet agencies and cabinet members debate and suss things out and consider things. It's also the implementation mechanism. But help us understand, you've sat on the NSC, just how big of a deal bringing it down from 350, 400 to whatever size it is now and firing 100 people on a Friday afternoon.
Well, Jen, I think the aim and the purpose is very similar to what they're trying to do with the intelligence analysis. They don't want to have anything, again, that's going to contradict Donald Trump. And as you well know, the National Security Council staff is the staff responsible for debating the various policy issues and exploring options the pros and cons, to make sure that there is going to be an interagency process and discussion that is going to be able to surface the most advisable path that U.S. policy should go down. But if Donald Trump decides these policies irrespective and without any input, I can see why they wanted to remove individuals within that National Security Council staff, because that is the place where you're going to have options discussed. This is where you may, in fact, raise issues, that's going to, again, be contrary to what Donald Trump's brothers and decisions are. So again, I think it just demonstrates that they don't want any independence of thought within the national security community. They want to make the decisions top down, and it's clear that, after Donald Trump makes these decisions, they just want to have supporting documentation to again, undergird his decisions, again, irrespective of the analytic strength of any of those decisions.
As you know incredibly well, because you've worked with all of them, I mean, there are people on the NSC working on issues that may not be front and center for the president at any given period of time because they're working in different bureaus, working on different things around the world. It's being reported that staffers were only given a half an hour's notice between when they were told they were being put on leave and when they had to exit the building. And they're, again, the points of contact when it's working through the interagency. Can you help us understand, why this could the sudden nature of this seems concerning and destructive on its own, but what do you think?
I think it's very concerning. And, Marco Rubio, who is Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, supposedly had blessed this decision.
Yeah.
And again, this is a way to constrain whatever type of, intelligence as well as discussion needs to take place. The NSC staff is supposed to orchestrate that interagency process. But I think from all accounts, there's really no interagency process right now. It's just, this group of folks up at the top who are moving forward with the decisions that Donald Trump is making, again, without the appropriate input. So again, this is just antithetical to all of those processes and all the administrations before it that relied heavily on the National Security Council staff in order to make sure that they tee up the options and the pros and cons of those policy courses.
John Brennan, thank you for staying up with us, not up with us, but thank you for being with us on Friday night. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.